Okay, so LIV Golf is once again facing some very harsh criticism after seeing the staggering difference in TV viewership numbers between the PGA Tour's recent flagship event and what we saw in LIV Golf Singapore. But here's the twist. LIV responded and they're okay with it. In fact, we even got some quotes here from John Rahm saying ultimately it's the PGA Tour that needs to take a play out of LIV's playbook if they're going to succeed, especially on a more global stage. There's so much more to it than just rating. So we're going to dig into some of these quotes in just a second. Before we do, we got to thank this week's sponsor, Titleist. And guys, the Vokey designed SM10 wedges offer 6 unique grinds and a variety of bounce options. And this gives you versatility to play any greenside shot that the course demands. And now we've got the latest edition of the Vokey lineup, which is the new SM10 06K with just 6 degrees of bounce, a much wider sole design. It's really designed for that pinpoint touch around the green with extra forgiveness from the bunker. In fact, Mike, I played a low bounce K. I love that K grind. And when you integrate that with the low bounce, you just get a whole lot out of it. Speaking of which, the best thing you guys can do, speaking from our own experience, is go and get fit. We had the opportunity to get fit for the SM10s, and it is just incredible what you learn, not only about the game, your game, and where you play it, but how you can fit those wedges to it. And there's just so many options out there, so you can find your perfect set of SM10 wedges and really sharpen up your short game. So go to your nearest Vokey fitter, or you can even try using that online wedge selector tool, which is also a great tool to really get the right SM10s for your game. So go to Vokey.com to find out more. So Mike, this is where, there's some newness to this because it feels like it's the debate as old as time of people saying that, LIV Golf is just not pulling the ratings. They don't have the viewership. And that is true in some ways, but I think it's more specific to certain demographics. And now we've got a new voice entering the chat. We've got the brand new CEO taking Greg Norman's place on the LIV side. And he's really kind of not shying away from this in any way. He's not trying to in any way twist or turn the ratings. He's saying they are what they are, and they're just not worried about it. And I think in a lot of ways we can kind of dig into is whether we agree or disagree with that. But on the surface, I really think he's got a point in some ways if it fits into that long-term goal that LIV has so long identified, which is being so much more of a global league than being an America first league.
I was going to say, it sounds like coming from a quote like that, where everything is okay, we're fine with that. That's telling us that the audience that's watching the players is not their audience. I mean, it's part of their audience, but their audience is much wider, and that's global. Right. And that's what they're going for. That's going to be, maybe in their boardroom, they're thinking, the only way for this thing to really survive is if we go after the audience that the PGA Tour doesn't have.
Right. And which I totally understand that leaning into the global audience is something that, again, it's a very untapped market for that the PGA Tour has had. But to me also, there's a certain extent of, does that mean that they're going to kind of give up on the U.S., or North America audience? Because that could come with its own, kind of issues as well.
Yeah, I would just say flip-flop the schedules. Like if I had to do this, if that was the plan, it's the same way the PGA Tour just has a few outside of, North America. They have a couple inside North America. Some of the ones that some of the fans here who do want to watch LIV and go and support it can go to do. And they do that now. They've got like Washington, D.C., Florida, Chicago, places like that. But maybe maybe their long-term goal is just a handful here and in Mexico, maybe Canada, I don't know, and the rest all the way over there on the other side of the world.
Well, let's first let's dig into some of these numbers just to see what the picture really looks like before we get into some of these quotes. So where this kind of all started was, again, a lot of this goes back and forth on Twitter, and you've got the same kind of similar voices weighing in, like Brandel Chambly, who, when he first heard these numbers, you know how Chambly works. He smelled a little bit of blood in the water, and he's the first guy who's going to lean in with any opportunity to criticize LIV. But that's why I think that the response that we saw from LIV, which we'll read the quote in a second, was kind of, in a way, well crafted in that, he's not denying it or trying to fight it. He's approaching it in a different way. But kind of bringing this back to it, the big core point was you had the PGA Tour's flagship event, which is the Players.
Yep.
For the PGA Tour, it really doesn't get any bigger than the Players. Maybe the only thing that you could say that would be bigger than that would be the cumulative effect of the entire FedEx Cup playoffs. But I think the players is their biggest, even think about East Lake, it's a limited field, very limited at that point. I think the players, it's at their course,
Right.
TPC Sawgrass. That is, if there's going to be any litmus test on the health of the PGA Tour, it's going to be the players. And really fantastic overall viewership, well over 3.5 million across the board. But what really the number that kind of turned a lot of heads was the Monday playoff, 9 a.m., on Golf Channel. Not something that traditionally you would think would bring a lot of eyeballs, right? Rory, you could say, definitely moves the needle.
Sure.
But ultimately, 1.5 million viewers at 9 a.m. to watch that playoff.
Incredible.
Which I think above and beyond what most people expected, that a Monday morning when most people are either at work or on the West Coast, it's 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
They're not even,
It was like the one time where no one's watching TV.
it's a tough time for TV.
Yeah.
But they still drew 1.5 million. Now, contrast that on the other side, you had LIV in their LIV Singapore event. And according to some sources that we saw, they reportedly drew an average of 34,000 viewers for that particular broadcast in Singapore. So 34,000 as compared to 1.5 million. That's where it's going to drive headlines, and it's going to drive guys, like I said, like Brandel Chambly, who's going to smell blood in the water. He's going to come in hot, and that's exactly what he did. He said things like the PGA Tour is killing it, and LIV is dying a slow, costly death. He said the audience sees right through them and chooses to watch those that prefer to play for history over legacy. I mean, he never misses his opportunity to twist the knife, does he? So again, he's saying the PGA Tour, they're playing for, history and legacy over money. But again, this is something that's a bigger picture. I know there's a lot of you out there who listen to and watch the podcast from all over the world. And this is where I think we need to start to separate out when we say that viewership numbers about demographics and where. And these are U.S.
Who's watching? Like, what time is this Singapore event on?
That's exactly it. And that's what we're going to get into the quotes in a second.
Okay.
Is, exactly being identified directly by Scott O'Neill, who's the new LIV CEO. But again, it comes down to you're talking about traditional broadcast. That's first of all, traditional broadcast meaning television, not streaming, not the LIV app, none of those types of things. And you're talking about narrowing in on just a North American audience, right? And what I want to debate with you in a second is, does this mean that ultimately where we're going to land is the PGA Tour is going to become the North American, primary tour, and LIV will become the global primary tour?
Yeah.
And I think that's something to just like kind of put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that in just a second. Let's talk about Scott O'Neill's response to this.
Okay.
Him weighing in and kind of responding directly to that very harsh criticism that we saw levied by Brandel Chambly. He said, "We're different though. We're a global sports league. Our first 4 events were in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and then we went over to Adelaide, Australia, then Hong Kong, and now we're in Singapore. For those of you who spent some time in New York, you might know that some of our events are played at 3 a.m. So it might not register on traditional rating scales as you might register a U.S. sports league." Yep. He went on to say, "And we're quite okay with that, especially now that we're starting to get more and more distribution around the world. We're getting quite a few viewers in the time zones we're in." And I think it's well put.
Yeah.
It's common sense. It's very level-headed approach to it. And it's almost identifying and saying like, guys, let's compare apples to apples.
Yeah, right.
We're getting great viewership where we are. And this is where we're going to get into the John Rahm quote in a second, because the further we proceed down this, the more we're watching it play out that's LIV's true intention is to be more global, right? Whereas previous to this, you might have said that, and this is from a more of a cynic standpoint, you might have said years ago that LIV was playing all these events outside the U.S. because at the time they were having trouble getting U.S. venues, getting U.S. audiences, and it was a lower hanging fruit. But if truly their intention was to be more global, well, then how can you fault them for following their own business model to this to this extent.
Yeah, and I feel like it wasn't their original intent. I feel like they were kind of pushed that way, like saying, hey, in order for this thing to survive.
So you think it was a smart pivot?
I think it was a pivot. Like, it didn't resonate in the U.S. market the way it wanted out of the gate. It still hasn't, obviously. So they made a pivot maybe a couple years ago, and like that's their business model. That's their mission.
Yeah,
global tour.
You guys weigh in and say, do you think it was originally their intent or wasn't? I mean, if I'm playing devil's advocate to that, I could say that I think that their intent was largely global, because you had guys like Greg Norman at the helm, right? Who I could see it being his motivation to bring more golf to his home country in Australia. Right. And you had very early on, look at the guys that were lured over to LIV, and we know the money, right? We saw the contracts, but we don't know what was said otherwise, the non-monetary factors that might have driven them over.
Right.
But we saw guys like John Rahm and Sergio Garcia and guys who might have been said, hey, listen, we're trying to grow we're trying to grow a more international, thing. And here's guys growing up in, let's say, Spain, and they don't have the same ability to view PGA Tour events as someone here domestically in the States because of the time change. Right. So maybe there was at least a quieter motivation to do it more globally.
That it was part of it originally, but I feel like
some of it's a smart pivot.
Yeah, some of it's a smart pivot because I feel like the first ever season of LIV was very small events. I think it was like 6 or 8. It was not many. I think a majority of them were in the United States. There were a couple, I think, that were overseas. And I could be wrong, guys. Let me know if I'm wrong. But I think over the last year or two, it started to go more global, and I feel less U.S.
Well, one thing that's panning out is it's clearly becoming more and more obvious that it is LIV's North Star is to become a more global. And in a lot of ways, it's smart. It's smart from a business standpoint as well. Not only from the area of, like, of course, the more noble cause of growing the game. We see guys like Bryson DeChambeau playing in India and stuff like that. And Bryson's one who said he wanted to grow the game. But from a business standpoint, one could very much make the argument that for way too long, the PGA Tour has left far too much of a global audience out. If you think about it, the PGA Tour has really, like I said, it's a North American tour, because 90% of the PGA Tour's events are held in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Yeah, right. There's a handful. Japan, you got the Zozo.
There's a handful.
But we're talking, maybe 3-4 events per year out of 20 something.
So does this make the DP World Tour LIV's biggest competitor? Because I feel like, now they're stepping on their toes to become this global tour. I feel like DP World Tour is the global tour, ex-US.
I get it, but I still think of the DP as more of a European tour. You know what I'm saying? I still think of it that way. I think the majority of their events are held in Europe, and I still think there's a lot of untapped areas that LIV is going into, and not to say that some of these tours haven't had one-off or here or there events, but like I said, look at how hungry Australia was for more professional golf. And we saw that Adelaide when
big time,
huge crowds. So it's tough to say, but
gap there.
This is what I say about that being like kind of the North Star. Scott O'Neill kind of continued in that same interview where he said, over time, this notion of being the F1 for golf is one I like a lot. Other than LIV, F1 is the only truly global sports league. They have teams and we have teams, and it's very different for golf to have a team sport. You're definitely playing in a premium market like F1 has. So, again, coming back to that kind of that business standpoint, a lot of these places that they're going into, you think about a premium market, there is money to be spent. There are advertisers who might not otherwise invest in an event that's happening here in North America, but might want something a little bit more local. You think of local. You think about, like I said, Riyadh and Saudi Arabia and so. From a business standpoint, to a certain extent, like, hey, this is a spot where you could bring some revenue because there's sponsors who are hungry for a golf audience to come in.
Yeah, makes sense.
But additionally, you look at the success that Formula One truly has had of being, as he said, the only real global league. So if their aspiration is to become the only other global league in sports, well, they're on their way to doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you ask me, like, what other global sports are there, I keep coming back to soccer and tennis. Can that fall into that category? Or is F1 truly the only global? How are you classifying it as
the way I think about that is like even look at soccer or football.
Yeah.
You know, really there are global events that coming on. Like you have like the World Cup. You have
even Olympics is a global
right,
sporting event.
but they're not leagues.
They're events, right?
They're events. They're things that we wait for them to come around. And otherwise, a lot of these leagues are far more localized. You know, that while they may have, look at even the NFL. The NFL now takes, one or two
to London, right?
Yeah, over to London, or they play because they're trying to expand Germany, whatever it may be.
Yep.
But that doesn't make them a global league.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it's, in order to be considered a global league, you need to every single season play the majority of your schedule needs to play out all over the globe, right? Not just these one-offs where you're trying to build a little bit of an audience, or not just these one-off events like, let's say, the World Cup, where every 4 years everyone gets together, or the Olympics. It's got to be every single season.
Yep.
So this is a very clear and laid out vision on the side of LIV, laid out by their new CEO. They're not dodging or ducking in any way or hiding from the ratings that they're getting here in America and in North America, broadening that to Canada and stuff like that. They're more doubling down on this is what their approach is. So the question then becomes is that approach correct? And can the PGA Tour learn something from this? Or is this, again, another motivation, as something we've talked about recently, for them to have a merger and become complementary?
Yeah.
Where one is the global tour and one is the North American tour, but they work together, to stop the, who gets suspended from who and stuff like that. Find a way to work together and realize that they can benefit from each other. John Rahm had some interesting things to say about it, and I want to dive into those in just a second, but let's just do a word from our sponsor.
All right, it's already changing the game on tour. And now it's time to transform yours. Players like Justin Thomas are wearing the new HyperFlex golf shoes from FootJoy, which offer a terrific blend of athletic style, flexibility, and targeted stability. I thought JT was going to pull it out at Innisbrook.
Yeah.
He's trending. Play great at the Players. He's right there. He's on my list for Augusta. I just think that guy's trending. Maybe it's the shoes.
And it is, I will say, it's cool too, seeing him wearing the new HyperFlex, both there and in TGL.
Yes, I noticed that as well. So listen, if these guys are putting that much faith into shoes, they've got to be good. We both wear them. We have played in them. Super comfortable. They look great. The colorway patterns, they pop. These are the golf shoes of the season. You have to check out the new HyperFlex. Go to footjoy.com. Check it out. Pick up a pair. You will not be disappointed. All
right, so let's talk about what John Rahm said, because I will tell you, I woke up this morning to headlines everywhere. This is going to happen when John Rahm speaks, especially with anything insinuating what LIV might be doing well or something that the PGA Tour might be missing. People are going to jump on it.
Absolutely.
So, he talks about this, and after that, I want to kind of have our own conversation about it and have you guys weigh in the comments too. Is this something that the PGA Tour needs more of? Because it seems like that's what John Rahm's insinuating, and it seems like it's another indication that John is, for as much as people try to sometimes make the narrative that he's missing what he had with the PGA Tour, to me, it's just one more thing that kind of promotes the idea that he's happy where he's at, right? So, but it also, kind of reading between the lines of what he's saying, I don't know if it's for everyone, like what he's enjoying. I don't know if it's for everyone, and that could really bode for like which guys do switch leagues and which ones don't. But let's get into what he said. And this was on an interview he did on the Joe Pomp show just the other day. And he was speaking specifically about LIV. He said, "I love what we've been doing. I love we are going to South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Australia. I don't mind traveling at all, but there are some that might. I don't know how they can make that happen, but the idea of having a world tour type thing is very enticing to me." He said, "Seeing new cultures, visiting new cultures, especially when you put it in front of a crowd that hasn't seen a high-level golf tournament before, it's incredible." So he's acknowledging that he's enjoying this idea of playing in places that the tour hadn't brought him before. He's clearly reading from the crowds, that the crowds are enjoying kind of getting their opportunity to see a live golf event.
Yep.
But at the same time, he's also admitting that it's not necessarily for everyone. And that kind of goes back and reminds me of the fact that at the time when some of the players were making the jump, a lot of guys seemed to, over to LIV, a lot of guys seemed to use that same justification that they wanted a less travel intense schedule. And although LIV technically has less events than what the PGA Tour does on a traditional season, one, LIV golfers are more obligated to attend every event, both contractually, but also for their team and supporting their team. They need to be there. So it's not like the PGA Tour where you can kind of decide which event you're going to play and which ones you're not. But also, that's significant travel. Now, when you're talking about flying all over the globe and trying to say inform and game ready and all those types of things, John's right. It's maybe it's not for everyone. And I think there's going to be some people who feels like a lot more rigorous schedule than you get on the PGA Tour.
Sure. I mean, the guys who don't like the time change, there are some 13, 17-hour flights, foreign countries, they got to deal with the time, different food, different life. But to John's point, there are people who are like, hey, listen, John got paid hundreds of millions of dollars to go to LIV, and now him and his family get to see the whole entire globe. If he's the adventurous type and that's something that's been on his bucket list to go see, then LIV is all for him. Yeah. But I could see there are guys who are, maybe they miss home, maybe they wanted a little less, and, being on the opposite side of the world is just not for them.
Yeah.
But I don't know, man. I think for the money, I think a lot of these guys can put that aside. The season's short enough. I think... I don't see it being a huge issue.
Well, and
couple back in the States.
I think if nothing else, it's definitely it's a very personal choice. It's a very person by person issue. It might be a huge issue for one guy and not for another. But broader picture, does this uncover or identify a bigger issue for the PGA Tour? And if you really look at it, like LIV has, and you got to tip their hat to LIV in that they have addressed a lot of issues that were consistent gripes for players on the PGA Tour and for fans in some ways. So in a way that doing something like this can move the sport forward. I still think that we're pumping the brakes on moving the sport forward altogether is not with some sort of merger between the two of them. I still think the divide still hurts the game overall. But what I mean by that is you look at the PGA Tour's schedule, and going back to what we said earlier, really on the surface of it, it's a North American tour. You've got probably 80% of the events are played in the United States. Then you sprinkle in a couple of Canadian events, a couple events in the Caribbean, a couple events,
and it seems
in
healthy.
Mexico, right? But outside of that, other than whether you call it the wraparound season, the fall season, whatever, bringing in like a Zozo event. And I understand like even the PGA Tour is clearly recognizing that a little bit as they try to make some of those more signature or elevated events to try to get bigger fields over to these. The reality is that there's no getting around the fact that the PGA Tour has largely stayed away from that global market, across the board. So is this something that does the PGA Tour need to learn from that and start introducing more global events? Or is it better for the tour to stay in its lane and do what it's done well and has worked for it for so long and it's clearly working in the ratings, stay here with the States and let LIV be the tour that does that and takes on the global market?
I think that's the answer because I think the tour is healthy. Despite what people say, I think, look at the viewership of the players. They've got the TV time on the weekends. You turn on your TV, it's there. They have that. So I think people are going to tune into golf here in the States. They have their audience. But I don't even know if they can go to a global schedule. I don't think the tour can because they are a 40 event a year tour.
Yeah.
You can't have guys flying 13 hours coming back. I mean, they had some guys do that once from like Malaysia over to the Farmers. And it's a big move, especially guys are playing weekly. Where at LIV, they're not playing every week. So it's easy to be like, all right, I'll go to Singapore in 3 weeks from now.
Right. And there's also the massive hurdles to overcome of you're just reversing the roles on this number that everyone gets so focused on, which is the viewership.
Yeah, they got to stop.
Right? Because what's going to happen is, let's say the PGA Tour does have its own Singapore event. I think the reality is you're going to see, if you're comparing the exact same numbers, which is U.S. broadcast numbers, you're going to see those tank.
Absolutely.
And it's not a matter of necessarily of a lack of interest. there's a simple logistics thing, which Scott O'Neill so well points out there. It's 3:00 in the morning. Right? How many of us are going to watch it? Now, we may watch replays. We may watch, on streaming. We may record it on YouTube TV, whatever. But those numbers aren't counted. People may be doing that now for the live events. Getting caught back up. A lot of times I'll go on YouTube and I'll just watch the highlights from it if I wasn't able to watch it live because it's 3:00 in the morning. So the reality is it's an entirely different business model. Similarly, like you look at I know a lot of brands are global. I get that. But a lot of brands that sponsor these PGA Tour events have the bulk of their business and their customer base here in the States and here in North America. So as purses dramatically increase, I can't see a company like John Deere, who I get it, they're a global brand, right?
Yep.
But I just don't see them investing in and sponsoring a tournament that's in wherever. You know what I mean? Hong Kong or something like that. So part of that business model is now you're finding more local sponsors who that is their primary market. So I think that there's really nothing necessarily wrong with LIV taking up that mantle and clearly defining that this is their long term. They're operating on a more long term. They compare to Formula One, which has been around for 80 years, right? That's what they're going to look. So to me, it's just one more indication that some sort of, if not merger, some sort of collaborative agreement between the two to work together to say, instead of one tour trying to be all things to all people, one could be a tour that is operating on a much more global sense that, and LIV can handle that where they're growing the game and bringing it to more people in more areas. Right. Whereas, and not necessarily trying to come here and do too much in the States and directly cannibalizing that. Where I could see a world where where you're not going to have an event in the same week where they're going to be fighting, over a similar market, where they could coordinate their schedules better and stuff like that. And having, like we talked about in the last episode, having ways that you can have some players cross over for certain events. Some LIV guys come play in some signature events, and like where, here the U.S. market can start to see these guys playing together more than 4 times per year. And vice versa. Who knows? It's harder with the team format, but maybe there's some crossover events where guys from the PGA Tour, where it's not they're constantly on a global tour where they're constantly traveling all over the globe, but maybe 2-3 times a year they're making an appearance, and now new markets are getting to see golfers live that they never got to see before. There's something there. I think they need to both wake up and see that there's a way that they can benefit from working on this together.
And I doubt it. And I'll say this right now, and maybe I'm wrong, and if I'm wrong, come back and holler at me in the comments, but I don't think you'll ever see a PGA Tour player go and play in a LIV event. Unless they had gone to head, like forced. Part of this merger is like, you have to go. Scotty, you and this team we're going to put together with Xander, whatever. You're going to go do this. You have to. I don't know. I just can't see.
I agree with certain names being the never guys. You had Rory McIlroy, who said he would retire before he played in a LIV event. You have Scotty Scheffler, who kind of fired back some comments this past week, who just never seemed like he has any interest in it. But that being said, I got a feeling that there are guys on the tour who wouldn't mind being in that environment, playing a LIV event. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? I could see some guys out there who'd be like, I don't want to make the jump completely and make the full commitment, but there are guys who I see out there who seem like they're lukewarm to LIV and wouldn't mind experiencing it. But I could see a guy like Xander Schauffele playing one LIV event. I could see a guy like Tony Finau playing in one LIV event, or some of these young guns who are trying to get their name out there a little bit more. They're starting to have a little bit of success on the PGA Tour, but wouldn't mind exposing themselves to another audience.
The young guns, maybe.
And a guy like Knapp, I
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Do you guys think, honestly, even put the name in the comments, do you think there's anybody on the PGA Tour who, if given the invite, and I'm not talking about switching over to LIV, leaving the PGA Tour, if given the no consequence, no suspension from the PGA Tour invite to go over playing a LIV event or two, would they take that opportunity? I'd say with the purse alone, why wouldn't you?
I'm thinking a guy like James Nicklaus. He's a friend of ours. He's on the Corn Ferry Tour.
He's a Corn Ferry.
He's Corn Ferry Tour. But if he had the opportunity Do you think a guy like him would go, yeah, I'm going to jump at that episode. I'm trying to make my way on tour.
I think that's talking about a different level. I think anybody who
that's the only
hasn't
one.
quite, anybody on the Corn Ferry or these other, like the kind of feeder
haven't made it
tours.
yet?
Yeah. Those guys who get the opportunity to play for a $4 million purse are going to take it.
I guess then that's the only people I can think would go.
Yeah, but I'm even saying,
I can't think
even
guys that are on tour
even
now.
on the tour side, there are guys I think who would love nothing more than to play for a $4 million purse. You know,
We're going to see. And if that happens, I know Frank will text me that morning the link to the
you
article.
see who's playing this week?
Like, yeah,
You see who's
can't
playing?
lay in Live Singapore.
That'll be the headline of the podcast that week.
Mike's wrong.
Mike proven wrong. Or it'll be the other way. It'll be Frank proven
It'll be a
wrong.
hell of
No
an
one
episode.
will play. It will
right,
be.
let's see.
Want to hear what you guys think? Let us know. Either way, I think it's interesting, and it's just going to keep unfolding. And I just think it's more writing on the wall that each of these tours has its own strong points and how they can help each other if they find a way to work together. But we'll continue to watch and see if that ever happens. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.